there's a translation of the text in front of you from JPS 1917, as well as the Hebrew on the right. I will be only reading from the Hebrew when the translation is in doubt, and a lot of it will be paraphrased. Again, if anything is unclear, please let me know. So today we are going to try and talk about Yehuda, the first person, in my opinion, to ever do tshuva. So the question then is, so why would I say that? Well, first thing, one of the prerequisites in order for somebody to be doing tshuva is they have to have sinned. So as much as I don't like to put down our avot, I have to start by saying what Yehuda did wrong. So in Sefer Bereshit, so there's a slight fight between Yosef and his brothers, which leads to his brothers being so angry at him they refuse to speak to him. So when Yosef and his brothers are fighting, so the other question is, what's like in the we're right now chapter 37 of Genesis, Parsha Vayeshev. So now they're so angry at each other, they won't talk to each other, really bad. So what happens is that Yaakov sends Yosef to go visit his brothers, and here's what happens when the brothers see him. The brothers see him, and their first thought isn't, oh, hey, it's our brother, let's say hi. Their first thought is, we should kill him. So not looking good. So then Reuven convinced everybody, let's not kill him. So again, getting a little bit better now. But then, after they throw him in the pit instead, which again is nicer, I guess, than killing him, but again, still not a nice thing to do. Then Yehuda has a great idea of, I know, let's sell him off instead, because if we let him just sit in the pit, he'll probably die, and we get nothing out of it. So instead, we should sell our brother to slavery, because that way we'll get a profit. So that is the most charitable way of reading that statement of Yehuda is that he was trying to say, like so much what Reuven had done, that I don't mean for him to actually, die. I'll save him for now. Maybe I'll go back later, and then I'll be able to redeem him, and then it'll be okay. But the only problem with that is what happens afterwards, which we'll see. So you could say that that's what he did. That's what he was planning on doing. But the only issue is that he never goes back to try and save him. We see him being sold off, and then we see the aftermath. What is the aftermath? Where we see Yehuda and his brothers covering it up, pretending in front of Yaakov that actually Yosef had died. He had been torn up. They show him Yosef's bloodied cloak, his tonah pasim, his technicolored dream coat. They show it to Yaakov, and Yaakov sees it and assumes the worst, that Yosef has died, and has been eaten alive, and that's that. And then that's that. And then Yaakov is uncomfortable. He is inconsolably sad with his grief, and that's how it ends. So based on that, so there's another way of reading what Yehuda did as to be a little bit darker. Again, you'll feel free to not like this understanding, but you could say in terms of his degree of thoroughness, in terms of covering everything up as the ringleader of the brothers, is not only did he have a plan for how to get, the first thing they did was they took away his jacket. So his initial plan was, first things first, we'll kill him outright. Then they said, no, that's too harsh. So instead, they'll be let him die slowly and painfully, starving to death from dehydration in the pit. And then Yehuda had an even better idea. That's too slow of a death for him. That's not enough torture. What's a better way of torturing him? Let's sell him off into slavery. He will suffer until the end of his days, doing backbreaking labor, and then he'll die, and we'll know what had happened, and that way we'll have our clear conscience, and he'll have had maximum punishment and suffering for the entirety of the rest of his life. Not an easy, quick death as we kill him, not a slow death by starvation, but instead a long, painful, suffering life. That's what he deserves. So that's where Yehuda might be at right now. Not exactly your friend, not exactly the person who you want to be the future leader of the Jews. But that's where Yehuda is right now. So, and then what happens is we're going to fast forward a little bit. So now they have now that there's a chapter break in the text, right? And now we're going to the next chapter. So the next chapter, we shift from the focus being about all of the brothers to being just about Yehuda. So we see here that Yehuda, So it was at that time that Yehuda went down or left his brothers and instead befriended this Adulamite man named Hira. So here we see the word vayered going down, descending, which implies that after what Yehuda had done, things actually got far worse. They went from, right, so he went from doing something wrong to doing something even worse. So what do we mean by that? Because typically we say there's a statement in Chazal that mitzvah gereret mitzvah, avera gereret avera, that one good deed begets another good deed, and one sin begets another sin. So Yehuda started on the dark path of doing things wrong, and then he kept getting worse. So what did he do wrong here? By leaving his brothers and befriending Hira. So what he appears to have done by befriending Hira, why that's a bad thing. So this idea I actually heard from Rabbi Donnie Yaros, a good friend of mine. He said it about 15 years ago, but I still remember it because it was such a good thing. That basically, as we'll see, Hira, he becomes Yehuda's best friend, and he is with him through thick and thin. But the problem is that you can have good friends, but they don't necessarily help you. As in, they'll help you do what you want to do, but they're not necessarily going to tell you and do something that you should not have done. They'll be with you, but you probably shouldn't have been doing what they're helping you do. So that's the type of friend that Hira is. He's the wrong crowd. So what happens after he befriends Hira? So he sees Bat Yisha Knani Ushmo Shua Bekachev Evoeleh. So Yehuda sees this daughter of a Canaanite named Shua, and then he marries her, and then immediately consummates his marriage. So besides this being really quick, the whole process, so there's a couple of points that are questionable about this. One is that he's marrying a Canaanite woman, which is problematic because we know that all the great lengths that Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov went to in order to not marry a Canaanite woman. Yet, what is Yehuda doing here? He's marrying a Canaanite woman, right? Because Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov had all gone. They'd gone all the way. They'd gone all the way to make sure that their wives were from Haran, that they're from a family that's related to them, and that they are, good, wholesome people. As opposed to here, where there's no indication of any of that, and all we see is that it's a Canaanite. So that would indicate that he's deliberately going against what he knows his family tradition is, to marry a Canaanite woman. The more charitable way of reading it, which is the way that Rashi quotes and Unclos translates as well, is that actually, what do we mean by Canaani? We don't mean that an actual Canaanite, but Canaani could also mean a trader. So he was just a businessman. That's it. Not too bad then. But then the fact of the speed of his marrying her and then his immediate consummation seems a little out of touch for somebody who we would hope to one day be the leaders of the Jewish people. But that's what it is. So then we see that they give birth to 3 sons, Er, Onan, and Shelah. And also to note the place that they are, that she gives birth to them is in Chziv, which is the very northernmost part of Israel. And depending on how you draw the borders, it may or not actually be part of Israel. For more on that, you can see some of the shiurim we were doing on Shemitah. But that's an aside. So again, we see here that Yehuda is very far from his brothers. He has his own separate family that seemingly has no connection to what he had before, and that's where he's at right now. And then Yehuda decides it's time to marry off his kids. So what does he do? He finds a wife for his eldest son, Er, and her name is Tamar. Yeah, nice Jewish name. I've heard it before. So then, also my mom's name, as well as the name of my wife. So again, very good Jewish name. I'm sure many people can name. A lot of people name Tamar. So, right, so okay, that doesn't seem so bad, right? So what happens is that Er, shortly after they're married, he does Ra b'nei Hashem v'miteu Hashem. He does wicked in the eyes of God, and then God kills him. So that's not a good start. So then Yehuda turns to his next son, Onan, and says, you should consummate marriage with your brother's widow. You should do a levirate marriage, do yibum. And that way your brother will then have descendants. His name will live on through the child that you will have. And then, your brother won't be forgotten from the rest of the world. But, so Onan could have done the upright thing. He could have done the nice thing and helped out his dead brother and keep his name alive. What does he choose to do instead? Instead, Onan knows that the kids won't be his. He decides to make sure that his seed is wasted, that he will not be able to give kids to his brother. And then what does God see? God sees him doing this, and then God kills him as well. We just finished verse 10. So based on this, because I'll say that just like that was the problem that Onan did, is that he was wasting his seed, deliberately not impregnating Tamar. So it's the same thing as what had done. That had done the same thing, but for different reasons. Not out of spite for his brother, but for purely materialistic reasons of his wife was beautiful. His wife Tamar was beautiful. And he thought that if she gave birth, she would be ugly. So therefore, he deliberately did not get her pregnant. So they both had basically the same sin of deliberately avoiding having children, both of which for reasons that are definitely not good reasons why they did that. So that's where we are right now. So then so now Yehuda sees this, and he tells his daughter-in-law, go as a widow back to your father's house. I would give you to my third son, but he's too young. So we'll wait. I'll let you know when, and then it'll be okay. So the question is, why would he do this? So the most charitable way of viewing Yehuda's decision to wait is that simply Shelah was too young. But the thing is, though, it doesn't seem that way, because as we see the next words, Vayarbu Hayamim, right? It took many years, like many days or many years, until the next part of the story goes on. And what did Yehuda not do? He did not marry Shelah to Tamar. So why did he not do so? Why did he never get around to it? So the most charitable one is that he was afraid that Tamar was an Isha Katlanit. She was a woman who kills her husbands. So what does that mean? So it could be some sort of witchcraft that she's done. She's a witch, therefore she's doing it, or just that she's the source of immense bad luck that causes it. But either way, that's why he decided not to. He didn't want Shelah to die. So that would be the most positive way of reading it, as opposed to saying that simply he viewed her as being a murderer of his other two sons. So positive or negative, either way, Yehuda is not fulfilling his word, and he's leaving a widow to waste away, waiting for the potential, maybe, of being married to his last remaining son. So, and then instead we have the story of, we see that Yehuda's wife dies, and we see that he is, normally you'd expect, somebody to be sad. We saw how sad Yaakov was at the death of Yosef, but apparently Yehuda gets right back up right away. And then what does he decide to do? He decides to go shear his sheep. And who is he going with? His friend Chira. Right now they're going to Timnah. Right, this is all in the very northernmost part of Israel. This is the story is going down. Still very far from the rest of the brothers, the rest of the family. So, and then Tamar hears this, and she sees that her father-in-law is going there for the sheep shearing. And she knows that, that her father-in-law has been avoiding marrying Shelah after her. So she decides to wrap herself in a cloak and to confront him at the crossroads. So the question is, what is her intention in this confrontation? So you could say that the intent of the confrontation is, she's simply going to meet with him because, come on, I know you're in the area, no. Are you going to marry me or not? Are you going to marry me to your son or not? What's the holdup? Yes, yes. If no, no. Just you can't leave me hanging. Maybe that's what she had in mind. But as we'll see, Yehuda had a very different conception of what her intent was. So what happens? So Yehuda sees her and thinks that she is a prostitute or a harlot because her face is covered. Apparently, nobody used to cover their faces. Unless you were in that business. So nowadays that's probably not the case because we all wear masks as we should for our health reasons. But anyway, so that's what his assumption was when he saw her face being covered. So what does he then do? He then turns off to the road and he says, again being very crass, come and Havana Avoalaya, come and I will lie with you. So, right, so he's just straightforward propositions her. No hesitation, goes right in. Right, and he didn't know that this was his daughter-in-law, and then she says, then she plays the part. Either you could say this is her intent from the beginning, so therefore Tamar is setting this whole thing up, or that this is all simply caused by Yehuda's morally abhorrent actions. That because he sees her as a prostitute, she decides, you know what, let's do this way. If you're going to do it that way, fine. So she says, sure. What do you give me? Then he says, I'll give you two kid goats. And she says, that's fine, but give me security because I don't trust you to not run off afterwards. So then he asks, so what do you have in mind for the security? And she says, I want your signet ring and the string and the string around your neck as well as your staff. And then so he's like, sounds good to me. Gives all the securities to her, and then impregnates her. Again, all very fast. As opposed to just like what happened before when he married Bathsheba, also very quickly. So, and then what happens immediately afterwards? She gets up, she wraps herself back up, and goes back home wearing her sad widow clothes. And then Yehuda then tries to make good on his. So at least he's not the worst person. At least he decides to pay her. So he tries to pay her, and who does he send? Again with his friend the Adulamite, Chira, who's always his partner in crime when he's doing things that he shouldn't be doing, and then when Chira's trying to pay her, he can't. He gets there, can't find her. He asks around a little bit. They say there's never been a prostitute here. I don't know what you're talking about. Then he comes back and tells Yehuda, and then he can find her. And Yehuda says, I tried, and that's going to be it. So that'd be the charitable way of reading that story. The other thing is that basically Yehuda's more important in his personal self-image than making sure that he paid the prostitute. That was more important to him, his own image over that. So currently Yehuda has, what has he done? He has left a widow hanging. He has resorted to prostitution. He has placed he eventually placed his own image above making good on a debt. So then 3 months later, Tamar is pregnant. So what does Yehuda respond? So Yehuda, apparently the person in power, because he has the ability to say, well, let's take her out and have her burned at the stake. So the question is why? What warranted that? So an explanation that could be is that you could say that Yehuda was the head of the court in the time, and that you could say that Shua, this is what Rashi quotes, quoting Chazal, that Shua was a Kohen, so apparently the Canaanites had a parallel law to that of Judaism, that if the daughter of a priest were to have extramarital relations, then she will be burned. Whereas Judaism, we mean that to be death by molten lead down your throat. Apparently, the Canaanites meant it to be burning at the stake. So here we have Yehuda. As soon as he sees it perceived injustice, he's all for it, and he's like, let's burn her. So, and then as they are taking Tamar out to be burned, she sends a messenger to her father-in-law stating, by the way, this person who has these items, his person impregnates me. So now we're at a crossroads for Yehuda. Yehuda has two options here, right? So it's currently he sees in front of him his signet ring, his staff, and his strings that have been passed to him. So he has two choices. He can either, right? We're assuming, and he recognizes it. So what's he going to do? One option he has is he can simply say, I don't care who's the father. You are the one who desecrated the sanctity of your father's house, of your position, and therefore you're going to be burned to death. And he could just simply taken them and thrown them in the fire with her, and covered his tracks, and that would have been it. Similar to what he had done with Yosef, where he decided to bloody the cloak and convince his father that his brother was dead. And that way he would be, have a clear conscience. So that's what Yehuda could have done, right? He could have simply ignored this realization, and instead thrown her in the fire. There's also sort of, we mentioned before about how he has an issue of he's afraid of how things will look. It has saved a ton of face, because he could simply have said, nobody would ever know that he did it, and now, whatever evidence of him having slept with the prostitute is also gone, and he'll be able to maintain his lifestyle as his chief of the court. He can live a very happy, fulfilled life, and all he had to do was kill her off. But what does he do? He says the words "Tzadka mimeni." She is more right than I am. So in saying these two words, he in fact changes everything. He changes his path from where he'd been until this point. Until now, he had been going to a very dark place. We saw him start from being one of the brothers to being an active ringleader in the potential killing of, and then of the sale of his brother, potentially for very sadistic reasons. We then saw his leaving the family, marrying out, as well as his improper conduct that he had with dealing with his daughter-in-law. We also had his, falling with the wrong crowd and is trying to cover his tracks, whatever he's doing, similar to what he'd done before. And now here he says, she's right. And not only that, what does he say? Ki al kain lo natia l'shela b'ni. This is all because I did not marry her. This all happened. And then v'lo yasaf o l'da'ata. So now these next two lines these next two phrases are very dense. So I'm going to take a while to unpack them. So the question is, now that we saw that Yehuda did tshuva, he repented, he finally came back in the dark path that he was going down. Right? He said she's right. She's more right than I am. I am in the wrong. The question is, when he says that, what does he mean with his next words? So I'll give some possibilities for what he says, and you can decide which one you like the best. So one option is when he gives the phrase that this is all because I had not given my youngest son to be her wife. So in the most limited sense, you could say that what happened is that he gave her a pardon. Basically, he said, "You're right. You shouldn't have done it, but because I left you as a widow without ability to remarry, you're justified in your extramarital relations. And you're right. We shouldn't kill you for that. My bad. I apologize. We're not going to kill you, and that'll be it." And then the next line of that lo yasaf ol da'ata is that afterwards, he never spoke to her ever again. That was it. Cut ties. He's like, "I'm sorry. You're not dead. Go live your life, but not here. That's it. We're done." Right? He'll give her a pardon and say, "Go move somewhere else," and that's it. So, but would that be, the fullest form of tshuva? I'm not so sure. So another option is, right, which is the way that Chazal take, is that he admitted the whole story right then there in front of everybody. Until now, he'd been very concerned with saving face. So, but now he does the opposite. He's like, I'm going to come forward with the truth. I'm going to say everything, no matter the repercussions. What's important is that I protect Tamar. I take responsibility for my actions, and I make sure that she doesn't have to suffer because of what I did. Because she did nothing wrong. It really is all me. He realizes that this whole process is all his doing. He's not blaming somebody else. He realizes it's me. So if he says that, so what happens? So then the question is, what happens to the next line? Right now that he's admitted it's all my fault, I'm going to take full responsibility. The question is, what does full responsibility mean? So there's two possibilities for what full responsibility means. When it says v'lo yasaf ol da'ata, so one could mean that he never, as we mentioned before, we had the opportunity before if he cut all ties with her. But that's not how Chazal take it. Chazal take it in one of two ways. Either he never again had relations with her, meaning that he took care of her, he married her, but never again had relations with her, and took care of the rest of their lives, and to make sure that she was provided for, and that her kids that'll soon to be born will be taken care of. The other option is that what was the best way for him to take responsibility is that he married her and they lived together as husband and wife, and he never stopped being with her till the end. Right? So depending on where you put punctuation is which one you go with, but that's how he interprets it. And then afterwards, we see that the two children successfully born, and then these two children end up being the counting as you see later on in the next parsha, the next Torah portion. We see that they're being listed as Yehuda's rightful children, and also that they get rights as if they're his kids. So we see that he seems to do right by the children of Tamar. Well, again, the question remains as so. Let's recap, and then I'll answer the question moving forward. So we saw Yehuda. We saw him start as a brother with his family dispute, and then we saw him as he went down the very dark path of leading almost to the murder of his brother, then to his sale. And then we see him moving away from the family, moving in the wrong direction. We see him getting in with the wrong crowd. We see him being extremely duplicitous in his actions. We see him being hypocritical. We see him not only selling out his brother and tricking his father. We even see him starting to we see him lying to his daughter-in-law. We see him not only lying to his daughter-in-law, we see him resorting to things that most people wouldn't deem conscionable at all. We see him going to a prostitute. Again, was that even at Tamar's intention? Potentially not. Could have been entirely his fault. And he's given the opportunity, and he decides to burn them, to burn her at the stake. And it could have burned all the evidence. But what is Yehuda do? At that point, when he's at the lowest of the low, when he could have gone even further and covered his tracks, then he decides, you know what? I'm in the wrong. She is right. And he decides to take full responsibility. So what does that teach us about tshuva, right? This is the first time somebody did the wrong thing and then does the right thing afterwards. We see many times throughout Pre-Selichot before this, people sinning and then being punished. But here we see somebody turning things around. So what do we learn from him? What do we learn from Yehuda? What we learn from Yehuda is that what's important isn't how far we've fallen or that we have fallen. The important thing is that there is always a chance to come back. There's always a chance to right the wrong, take responsibility for our actions. The only question is, do we see it and do we take full responsibility? Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Sammy, and he will continue with the next one.
Okay, thank you very much, Chaim.